Howdy y'all, Rowan here, and you may notice that this channel has a channel name now, We Damage We. I decided to give myself a channel name instead of just going with my name. No real particular reason, just sort of felt right. So We Damage We, if you know the reference to that, very cool. I'll probably talk about it more someday, but for now, I'll leave it in mystery. So it's Friday. Let's talk about what I've read this week, what I've been reading. I read quite a bit this week, but most of what I read was short, so I've got a number of books to talk about, but most of them are short. So, first, we've got A Tomb for Boris Davidovich by Danilo. Danilo is a Serbian/Yugoslavian writer, or was. This book was published in the late 70s. It's called a novel. It's a collection of linked stories, where each successive story, a character from the previous story will make an appearance. Or in one case, it's an object that makes an appearance, a pair of raspberry-colored boots. Keese was born in the 20s, right? Nope, I'm sorry, he was born in 1935. So he grew up during World War II. He was the son of a Jewish father and a Christian mother. Because of that, he was lucky enough to be able to be baptized in the Eastern Orthodox Church, which saved him from dying in the Holocaust, which tragically his father was killed in the Holocaust. And he sort of explores that in a lot of his fictions, I guess. This book is much more about Russia, the USSR. Every story is about a death. Every story, the sort of, maybe not always the central character, but a major character in each story. It chronicles the story of their passion and their death, and often, almost every story involves the person being put into a labor camp and then dying. Either dying in the labor camp from, disease. I believe in one they try to escape and are killed. There's one where the person spends 25 years in hard labor and then dies shortly after they're released. This book got flack at the time of its release from people for being Marxist, and which I find to be kind of, I mean, it definitely has sympathy for the movements of the left, but it has no sympathy for the government of the USSR, who are portrayed as brutal and uncaring and bureaucratic. There's torture of people being forced into confession of things that they haven't done and things like that. The Russians are certainly not portrayed in a positive light in this. I loved this book. I thought it was fantastically written. It's a lot of the stories are sort of chroniclings of people in an almost sort of encyclopedic fashion that is very Borgesian. He sort of will have a sort of narrative interruption where he'll talk in the first person as the author, and interrupt the story at times. And the style just really worked for me a lot. I'm a big fan of that style. You can say that he's cribbing off of Borges, which is true, but I think a lot of people have cribbed off Borges. It's not necessarily an insult to say that. So this was an absolute solid 4.5 out of 5 book. It's absolutely worth checking out if you're into broadening your horizons and reading some Slavic literature. This is absolutely, can't recommend this enough. Next, we read Sleep Donation by Karen Russell. Karen Russell kind of became a it kid in the world of literature with her novel Swamplandia, which came out in like 2012. I believe it came out when I was in college. I read it when I was in college. This book was published. It was published by a small press called Davidovich Books that published ebook-only novellas. It was sort of an experimental press. And so this came out originally in 2014, and I never read it because I don't read ebooks. No offense to anybody who loves ebooks, it's just not for me. So this sort of languished in the sidelines. I'd always wanted to read it because it sounded like a really interesting concept. And then last year, that eventually Davidovich Books went out of business and the ebook went out of print. And so then we got Vintage Contemporaries put out a bound version of it that's illustrated and has a fun little sort of appendix that was entertaining. So this is a novella that's about in the near future there begins an epidemic of insomnia where people are unable to sleep, and it's chronic and fatal. So they will stay awake for days, weeks, months until they ultimately die from, like organ failure or things like that. And in response to this, scientists develop a type of technology called sleep donation, wherein people are able to, sort of through being hooked up to this machine, donate their sleep, which is then cleaned and reconstituted and then administered to these insomniacs. And it's like in 60% of cases it cures the insomnia, but even if it doesn't cure the insomnia, it keeps them alive and saves their life. So the story revolves around a woman named Trish, who is sort of like the top headhunter for this nonprofit sleep donation company. Her sister was one of the first people to die from this insomnia epidemic, like almost 10 years previously, and she weaponizes her sister's story to basically guilt trip people into donating their sleep, because the purest and best sleep comes from children, of course. So you have to sort of convince parents that their child should donate their sleep and that it's safe. It revolves largely around her interactions with the family of a child named Baby A, who is found to be a universal sleep donor, because not all sleep is it's like blood, where not all of it can be given to every person. But then the sort of inciting incident of the story is that a person named Donor Y donates sleep that is infected with nightmares. They do these screening tests and stuff to try and keep things like this from happening, but somehow Donor Y slips through the cracks, and the sleep that is infected with nightmares makes its way out into the world, and it basically like infects people with these horrific nightmares that are like so terrible that they don't want to sleep. And so then it begins that there's the people who can't sleep, and then there's the people who are afraid to sleep. And then it goes from there. It's a fascinating concept. I love sort of weird, borderline science fiction stories like this, or weird fiction, whatever you want to call it. Karen Russell's a great writer. She's not a flourishy. I laughed because I saw there was a review of this on Goodreads that was like, this book has too many $10 words and is pretentious and all these things. I really don't think that's true at all. I think that if you have that experience with this book, then you probably don't read a ton of literary fiction. And I also feel like, the idea that you should have to learn new words being offensive to you, like, why are you even reading in the first place? Like, aren't we all here to learn things, and expand our horizons? Anyways, this book, if it sounds interesting to you, pick it up, because it's great. I loved Swamplandia when that book came out. So I recommend that one as well. I've never read any of her story collections. She has a couple of story collections out, and I'll definitely this sort of reinvigorated my my passion for her and made me want to check those story collections out. So yeah, solid 4.5 out of 5 again. Great book. Next, we've got a poetry collection, Homie by Danez Smith. Danez Smith, I didn't know when I picked this book up, is a local cat. They are from St. Paul. And I figured that out because so this is published by Grey Wolf. It's very large, physically, book, weirdly shaped. But on the back, I was about to start reading it, and I noticed that it had quotes on the back from Hugh Min Win and Tish Jones. And when I was a young man, when I was about 20, I was in a relationship with a person who was part of the slam poetry scene in the Twin Cities. And I never became, like, great friends with most of the people that were in that scene, but I knew them, and they knew me, I think, to a degree, a lot of them. And so both of those people are people who I sort of knew peripherally, or knew of, who were part of the slam poetry scene in the Twin Cities. So that immediately made me hesitant, because I hate slam poetry. And there aren't many things in the world of literature that I'll say I hate, but I hate slam poetry. It sucks. It just is the worst, most boring, derivative, masturbatory type of literature, and the culture of it and around it sucks. Everybody just wants to pat each other on the back for being too woke, or as woke as possible, and I could go on a long rant about that, but I won't. So I went into this hesitant because of that, and was pleasantly surprised. Danez Smith is a queer, non-binary, black person, and this book is largely concerned with identity and the experience, the lived experience of being marginalized in those ways. Because of how concerned it is with that, I struggled to connect with it on a personal level. It's just not a work where I'm seeing myself in the work, which is fine. I don't need to see myself in every book. This book is not meant for me. I'm not the target audience, I think, for it, and that's absolutely fine. It is quite well written. They do a lot of interesting stuff with formatting. They do a lot of interesting stuff with, like, here's one where the text is all slanted. It's often very funny. Like this is part of a poem that's called Dogs, which is a bunch of very short stanzas. One stanza: the gay agenda made cat dog to offer your child's gender to their seven-headed god. Good stuff. Like I said, I didn't connect with it on like a personal level, but I found it to be very well done. If you're a fan of poetry, if you are a fan of reading about the experiences of queer people, of people of color, definitely check this book out. Also, just wanted to say that there is a poem in this book called "All the Good Dick Lives in Brooklyn Park," and that's probably the best title of a poem that I've read in a long time. Brooklyn Park, of course, is a suburb to the northwest of Minneapolis. So, yeah, that's Homie by Danez Smith. 4 out of 5. Next, we've got No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This is a book that I had seen a couple of different people on BookTube do reviews of, including Clifford Sargent at Better Than Food. It sounded up my alley, so I picked it up, and I was kind of disappointed with it. I was really excited to read it. It really seemed like it had a lot of things going for it. It seemed like it would be something that was really up my alley, and in the end, it was just okay. So this is a story written by Dazai. Was a sort of miserable wreck of a dude who was always trying to kill himself. He entered a suicide pact with a lover when he was young, and she died and he did not, and it kind of ruined his life. He was disowned by his family, and then he had a couple more suicide attempts before ultimately again going into a suicide pact with a lover and succeeding. They drowned themselves in a river, I believe, when he was like 39. This was his final work. It's highly autobiographical. It features a young man who feels so out of step with the world that he doesn't consider himself to be human. He puts on the face of a clown to try and appease and fit in with the world, but he just feels at odds with existence. He, like Dazai, tries to commit suicide multiple times, including a suicide pact with a lover who he survives and she does not, and because of that is disowned by his family. The book has a sort of... It gets compared to Catcher in the Rye because it's about a young person who's sort of disaffected with the world and feels out of step with society. I think that is a not an unfair comparison, but maybe a deceiving comparison, because Catcher in the Rye is about being a teenager and how all teenagers sort of feel out of step with the world as they sort of grow and come into themselves. This is about a person who is clinically depressed and needs help and doesn't get it. It also reminded me a lot of the fiction of Charles Bukowski, who obviously is somewhat of a controversial figure in the literary world, but there's a lot of womanizing and misogyny in this book. Women are sort of portrayed as useless and sort of likened to... He's an alcoholic. He becomes an alcoholic and sort of takes refuge in alcohol as a way to numb himself and distract himself from the world. And he largely treats women the same way, as an escape from the pain of reality. But he looks upon them with generally disdain and finds them to be largely useless to him. He's generally looking at women as how can I use you to make my life better. So he's obviously not a great person. I don't know. It just... Not a lot happens in the book, which is fine. Not everything needs to be plot heavy. And it's very short. It's like 175 pages long. But I just sort of walked away from it being like, I can understand why people really like this book, but it just didn't work for me. I'm sort of surprised that it's such a classic in Japan because nothing really happens in it. It is, like Catcher, sort of popular with young people who feel disaffected, and it's no secret that depression is a big problem in Japan, because they have such a sort of repressive society. Their cultural mores are so strict that I think that people there end up feeling disaffected and outcast from society a lot more, which is why otaku culture is such a big thing there. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with this book. It's not poorly written. The language isn't anything to write home about. It's very simple and straightforward. But it just didn't work for me. So this is like a 3.5/4 out of 5. The last book I finished this week was Et tu, Babe by Mark Leyner. Mark Leyner is a guy who is best known for co-writing the book Why Do Men Have Nipples in the 2000s, which I'm sure he's not. Maybe he's fine with it. If I was him, I wouldn't be thrilled that I found wild success with that, and my fiction is generally forgotten. But this is not a book that many people have read. It's got like 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. This was his first novel after a couple of story collections, and the sort of premise of it is that after his previous story collection had found a lot of cult success, and Rolling Stone wrote an article where they called him like the best young writer, or the best living writer, or the best cult writer, or something like that. The story of the book concerns Mark Leyner and his sort of rise as the greatest, most popular, best, most important writer in the world. In the wake of this sort of explosion of popularity from his story collection, he becomes this unfathomably famous international celebrity. This book is very weird. It's very, I hate this word, but it's very trippy, man. And so things like he needs bodyguards, so they go to nursing homes and get these nonagenarian women and then graft plastic, like, synthetic muscles to them to make them super buff, and then have them patrol around and kill people for them. Who they run writers' workshops, and he asks all the writers to writers' workshops if they think that they could ever be as good of a writer as he is, and if they say yes, they abduct and torture them until they decide to stop writing forever. There's a part where he talks about the practice of getting tattoos on your organs using radioactive ink that will then show up on X-rays, which is only illegal in certain countries. So he goes to Mexico to get shit tattooed on his heart. There's just so many weird, funny. It's extremely funny. There are parts that are in the style of like screenplay, letters. It's experimental, largely in its ideas, but sometimes in its form. It's got a quote on the back from Tom Robbins, and that's kind of who it reminded me of. The sort of psychedelic writing. It's not incomprehensible by any stretch of the imagination. It's narratively very followable, but it's very psychedelic and very weird, and largely about fame and why people want to be famous and what fame does to people, how it corrupts them and makes them shitty, basically. It's not the most profound book I've ever read. It's not that profound at all, I would say, but it's very funny and very enjoyable, and I had a great time reading it. So 4.5 out of 5. And then the two books that I'm reading currently. First, Terrence Hayes' American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. This I just started. I'm not very far in it. This is a collection of like 80 or so sonnets that all have the same name, American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. They are about all sorts of stuff. I was a little trepidatious going in knowing they were all going to be sonnets, but they aren't rhyming sonnets, which is nice. I would have probably not been able to deal with that if they had been. Yeah, so far I've been really loving this. Even just in the first poem, my hunch is that Sylvia Plath was not especially fun company. A drama queen, thin-skinned and skittery, she thought her poems were ordinary. I'm excited to. When I was first reading this, I was struggling to kind of get into it. I think I just wasn't in the right headspace to read poetry at that moment, but so I put it down for a bit. But I'm excited to pick this back up and read more of it. And then the other book that I am not finished with yet, which I'm surprised I've been reading it for like 3 or 4 days. Stoner by John WIliams. This book is really good. I will say. It's living up to its reputation as being a sort of modern classic. I am reading this because of Rick McDonnell's BookTube spin, so I'll be making a standalone video review of this book once I finish it, probably Saturday or Sunday. You can peep that. So yeah, I won't speak too much on it now because I'll be making that video soon. So yeah, that's everything that I read or have been reading this week. If you've read any of these books, shout out in the comments. Let me know what you thought of them. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of great positive feedback from people. People have been finding my videos and commenting on them, which has been very humbling, and I appreciate the support and the love coming from everybody. So yeah, that's it for this week. Stay tuned for more. Again, I'm Rowan. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.